looking back, I did that over and over again. I just wanted people to accept me. I just wanted people to love me. And I let that get in the way of my relationship with God. I just did. It was more important to me to be accepted than to do the right thing. My story over and over again comes back, but then there was this boy. And things were going along great. But of course, a boy, that very same time, I had just started dating, and there was a boy. The whole mess of, and then there was a guy. What I ended up doing, and then there was a boy, and then there was a boy. So you're a burden. You're an embarrassment to your family. You're never going to get it right. You're never going to be good enough. You've made a complete disaster of your life. Everybody's better off if you're gone. This is the voices I was hearing. So I'm bawling my eyes out trying to load this gun.
I don't know how you could have avoided him for 5.5 hours.
Right.
I was like, holy cow.
Well, and I didn't really avoid him. I just got beaten by him for 5.5 hours and stayed in a relationship that was not healthy at all just because I wanted to be accepted and loved.
Let me ask you a question. Do you want to be loved? Do you want to be accepted by others? Of course you do. I mean, who doesn't want to be loved, right? However, what would you be willing to do to be loved? Would you be willing to lie, cheat, steal, or compromise your beliefs? Have you ever known anyone who jumps from relationship to relationship, never finding peace and never finding true love? In fact, the relationships they seem to gravitate to are unhealthy and maybe even abusive. Does it seem like this person is cursed to repeat the same kind of relationships over and over again? Maybe it's not a curse. Maybe it's an addiction. And maybe this person is you. How does a person recognize love and relationship addiction? And how does a person break free from this cycle of insanity? These are the topics that I want to discuss today as our guest tells her life change story. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. So, hey, friend, thanks for joining me. And why don't you introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are?
Hi, I'm a grateful follower of Jesus Christ, and I struggle with codependency, anxiety, grief, and pride. And my name is Renee.
Hey, Renee, and thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast. This is going to be a great day. I'm
happy
excited
to do it.
Yes. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your beginnings? So where are you from? Where were you born? And where were you raised?
I was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we were there just for a few years before my dad got transferred for a job, but we ended up back in Siloam Springs when he started working at John Brown University when I was just a little over 5 years old. So I've been in the area until I graduated from college. This was home. So
okay. Did you have any siblings?
I do. I have a brother that's 5 years younger than I am. So he was just a baby when we moved to Siloam. And he's still in the area. So we both went to John Brown University. We both graduated from Siloam Springs High School. So this has pretty much been home, except for when I ran off for a few decades.
So he's a younger brother.
He is a younger brother, correct?
Are you the firstborn?
I'm
then?
the firstborn, and definitely the typical firstborn, probably a little bit. Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in your family? Were you really close to your brother? Were you close to your parents? I mean, tell me about your childhood growing up.
I would have told you until pretty far into my adult years that I had an idyllic upbringing. I have a great family. We have a very close and involved extended family. So every holiday was spent with grandparents or aunts and uncles, or I had 4 Christmases every year because we'd have one at home and then at my grandmother's and then at my great grandmother's. So there was a lot of family involvement. My parents were both Christians, so we did grow up in church, and we had a church family, and we're very involved there. Anytime the doors were open, we were pretty much there. But I had all these problems and couldn't figure out why, if my parents were so perfect and my family was so perfect, why am I so messed up?
So what are you referring to? What were things that you were dealing with as a child? Because you said you were raised in a Christian home and you called it idyllic. So what was the problems that you were dealing with?
Well, my parents, again, like I said, were super involved in church, and our church was kind and good. And there were a lot of, like, if something happened, our church family was there, but it was a very legalistic church. And so I grew up with the idea that I had to earn God's love, that I had to say no to all the right things and say yes to all the right things, or I was going to be in trouble. And that kind of carried over to the home too. I knew my parents, I could feel and sense that my parents were very stressed out when I was really young, but I took it as it's me. I'm the problem here. And so, and mom with her, inability to communicate with me, that kind of reinforced that idea that I was causing them not to be happy. And I believed that.
What did you believe about yourself?
Yeah, mom is a perfectionist to this day. And so I now understand she always wants everything to be just right. But because I could never live up to that, I was absolutely convinced that I was not good enough. And so I went overboard trying to be successful. If I was in something, anything, I wanted to be the best at it. And I pushed myself. And all of it just to either get my mom to finally approve or my dad to tell me he was proud of me, which neither one really ever happened.
So performance.
Correct. Big time. And at least through school, that was my thing. Up until at least junior high, it was a constant, and it made me very anxious because I never could. And I always wanted to please everybody. I had to please my parents. I had to please the people at church. I had to please my teachers, and you can't always do that. So it was this roller coaster of emotions, and it just continued to reinforce that idea that I'm just not good enough. And I did that to myself as much as anybody. Like, nothing I did was ever good enough.
Wow. Let's move into junior high and high school. So where did that line of thinking get you? Did you start coping? Because, junior high and high school is kind of whenever we start finding out new things. We find out that there's drugs, there's marijuana, there's alcohol, there's other things. So did you use any of those kind of things to cope with the hurt that you were experiencing inside or not?
Not as long as I lived in my parents' house. But there was a short period in junior high where a new family moved in across the street. They were from California. They were so different and cool, like nothing like these Arkansas people that I'd been around my whole life. And of course, in my mind, there was always some escape from this mess. And maybe it was because, we're Arkansas and they're California. So I started hanging out with the girl. She was my age, became my best friend, and my best friend's brother, also at that house, kind of became my boyfriend. So, and my parents did not approve. They didn't think I was old enough to have a boyfriend at 14. I think it even started at late 13. And so, of course, in my rebellion, I'm like, well, that's because they're so strict and stupid. So I kept seeing this boy. And of course, I'm at this home with this boy where there weren't a lot of rules. And so we were left alone a lot. And for a long time, I still kept my standards. I still stood up for what I believed in. But this was the first time that I really felt like someone had paid attention to me or appreciated me in any way, which is not true, but that's how I saw it. So by the time the pressure started coming for sexual things, I wanted to say no. I knew in my heart it was not what I'd been raised to believe, but I didn't want to lose this, whatever it was I had with him. So I gave in to that. So that would be the first place I could say my need to please, my need to be accepted and appreciated allowed me to just completely let go of my values and do something I knew that I shouldn't be doing.
Now, you mentioned, a strong being in the youth group, a strong Christian influence in your life. Did you ever have a God moment where you accepted Christ? I mean, and when did that happen for you?
Yep. It was February 26th. So we're coming up on the anniversary right before I turned 7. And pretty much followed. I did believe it was important to me. And even in junior high, when all that was happening, I'm still going to youth group. I'm still believing all that truth, but there was this need to belong and need to be loved that overshadowed my true belief in Christ. So in high school, I was, again, trying to follow Christ. I think all my friends in high school knew, like, nobody asked me to go to parties because they knew I wouldn't. That just wasn't where I was. And I was, again, trying to make straight A's and very, very worried about being the best at whatever. I played French horn. I had to be first tier all region French horn player. And I was. I played piano. I had to get the best trophy at all the piano competitions. Like, it was just somehow trying to make myself feel like I was worthy, but yet inside I never did. I still just felt like I was unlovable and I was never going to be good enough.
So it sounds to me like music played a big part in your adolescence. So did that lead you out of high school into a college? Did you go anywhere, or did you go right into the workforce? What happened after high school?
Well, music was everything in school. I was in choir at church, and I sang a lot at church, like both specials and in choir. I took voice lessons. I took classical piano from 6 years old until I graduated. So music was my outlet in high school. I wasn't good in a lot of other places. I wasn't popular. All my friends were popular. They were the cheerleaders. They were the homecoming queens. I just wasn't. But the one place that I felt confident was when I was doing something musical. And so my father and I, much to my mother's dismay, decided that I could go ahead and just leave high school and go on to college. So that's what I did. What would have been senior year, I just left high school and got into college because I had all the stuff I needed to get into college. I just didn't have what I needed to get a diploma. So I was convinced, well, if I just get away from this place, everything's going to be better. I'm going to be a whole new person. I get my chance to start over. And so I was so excited about starting school. And my freshman year, I came in there like gung-ho, knowing this was going to be the change of my life, right? Everybody's going to see me different. I'm going to be popular, and I'm going to be accepted, and I'm going to be loved. But what I didn't realize is that I was walking with the same stuff. I had the same insecurities, the same people pleasing, all that was still there. So it looked like it was going to start out different, but I was still Renee. And so by sophomore year, I had kind of decided this wasn't working, and I got invited to go out dancing one night. So I loved to dance. So I went out dancing. Well, while they were dancing, there was alcohol. And I had never really drank any alcohol, but like one of the older people there was one of the people from my school that was old enough to get a drink, handed me a drink. I drank it. I was like, ooh, hey, this kind of makes me not so afraid to be me anymore. And so suddenly alcohol became this confidence booster. Like, I completely become like this party girl when I drink. So that started becoming part of my life at that point. So my GPA went from 3.7, I think, 6 my first year, to a 1.8 my sophomore year.
Wow.
And for a summer, I just lived. It was bad. It was bad. I was drinking. I was dating multiple guys. I was just trying everything I could to try to find some self-confidence and some contentment and peace in my life, and thought that was the way to go. And it was not working. So by the end of that summer, I was pretty suicidal. That was the first time I remember really thinking about ending my life. And
so let me stop you there.
Yeah.
So what led to the depression that got you to think about, I mean, that's pretty low when you're thinking about ending your own life. So what led to that? Was it some of the choices that you made and you felt some shame or guilt for that?
I think so. I don't know that I would have told you that at the point, but I was sleeping with multiple men. I was drinking heavily a lot, and I knew that's not what life was supposed to be about. I'd been raised right. I had Jesus in my heart. So there was a part of me that knew what I was doing was just completely wrong. And I also realized I wasn't feeling any better. This was not making me feel loved or special or like I was worth anything. And so it's like, I've tried everything and I still feel worthless. So why even, like, I was 19 years old and I was already worn out, trying to find peace and like just feel good about myself. And so I was like, well, if this isn't working, I might as well just not do this anymore. So my dad actually called me one night. I had not spoken to them much. And he called me one night. At that time, my brother would have been 14. And I was actually had come home, and I don't even remember. I think I had some kind of pills I'd gotten hold of, and I was ready. Like that was my plan that night when I came home from work. I was going to end it. And my dad called out of the blue, which was weird. And this is before cell phones, right? So he had to actually catch me at the apartment. I answered, and when I realized it was him, I thought, well, you know what? I'll have a conversation with Dad because this will be the last one. So we were just talking about how work was and what was going on. He was kind of making small talk. And then he said, I can't tell the story. He said, I just want you to know I went in and I found your brother crying in his room. This is my 14-year-old brother. That's not a typical, thing for him to be doing. And he said, he asked him why. And he said, I just miss my sister. And I hung up that conversation and realized I could not do this because if my brother's already having a hard time just because I'm living in Tulsa, an hour and a half away, I can't kill myself. Like that's going to be something he may never recover from. So I decided not to do that night. And I look back, it's like, that's just the first moment I can look back and say, that was all God. That was not a coincidence that Dad happened to catch me in the apartment. All of it was literally God's timing to save my life. He did not want me in my life that night. So
God intervened, didn't
absolutely.
he?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
And actually by the time I graduated, ready to get back in church and kind of do the right thing for a little while.
Yeah.
For a short time.
So you graduated, right?
I graduated with a psychology degree. There's nothing I could do with a psychology degree. So I moved to Tulsa. I moved to Kansas City. I'm sorry. And I tried like all kinds of different jobs and nothing was working, but I was involved in a singles group and I was getting back in church, singing in a choir, really trying to follow Jesus. And things were going along great. But of course, a boy, my story over and over again comes back, but then there was this boy. It was a boy in the singles group. He was a nice Christian boy. Everything about us was good. It was a good relationship, especially considering the ones I'd had before. But then he ended up breaking up with me and it had gotten pretty serious. And so when he broke up with me, I felt like I couldn't really be part of the singles group anymore. It felt weird because he had already been there. He had already been friends with all these people. So suddenly I, again, didn't feel like I belonged. And at that same exact time, I started working at a restaurant and they pulled me in, like wanted me to belong. But of course, it was all the partying and it was and that was kind of the last time. Like that was the beginning of me going down a 30-year path away from God.
30 years.
I think so. It was more like 26 years. Yeah. Yeah.
So can you nail it back to where, okay, so that boy broke up with you and you felt rejected and then this other group was accepting you.
Correct.
And was that kind of the tilt? And now, I need to live like these people because, they accept me.
Yep. Once again, I needed to belong more than I needed to follow God. Looking back, I did that over and over again. I just wanted people to accept me. I just wanted people to love me. And I let that get in the way of my relationship with God. I just did. It was more important to me to be accepted than to do the right thing. Now, all my friends at this time are getting married and settling down, and I've got nothing because my party crowd life did not exactly lend itself to serious relationships. So I was heard singing karaoke, and the band called me and said, "Hey, would you like to go on the road with us?" And I was like, why not? So that's what I did. I went on the road with a band, with just a cover tunes band that sang in hotel bars.
How long did you sing with the band?
About 2 years. And we traveled the country for a while, but then eventually they got a long-term gig in Florida. And so that's how I ended up down in Florida, was through this band.
Where did you go after that?
I decided I needed to go back to college. So I decided to go back and get my master's degree and then teach, which my dad was a teacher, and no big surprise I ended up there. But I had a choice at the time. I got into University of Arkansas, and my parents said, come back and live with us, and you can go to U of A. Or I got into University of South Florida, and I was trying to make that decision. Well, at that very same time, I had just started dating, and there was a boy. Dating a bouncer at the bar, and I thought this relationship was he overwhelmed me. He literally, he swept me off my feet, very, very purposefully swept me off my feet. And so I thought, there's no way I can leave this. It's just too perfect. Like this is going to be the relationship. So I chose University of South Florida. I did not come home. I stayed down there because I thought this guy was going to be the answer to all my problems, just like every other time there was some guy. And I knew he did not believe in God. He had anger issues, which he had just gone through a serious car accident where a woman was killed. And so he was dealing with that and the legal issues and all the stuff that came out of it. And so I just told myself, well, his anger's just because of all that. I kind of ignored the red flags. And we even had cops called on fights early in the relationship. And of course, there was a lot of drinking involved. I was drinking a lot. He was drinking a lot. So I just figured, well, this is just, a passionate relationship. But at some point, as we got serious and started, we ended up married. I figured, okay, it's time to stop drinking. Like, this does not need to continue. We're grown adults, but he didn't stop. And at some point, I guess it hit me like, oh my gosh, he's an alcoholic. And I'm married to him. And I was drinking just as much as him when it started. So then it's like when I wanted to kind of slow down and he didn't, I just went along for the ride. It's like, okay, well, let's just drink then. And so, but as he became more controlling and more possessive, I began to drink just to deal with him. Like if he's going to be drunk and angry and sometimes start to push me around, it was easier to deal with when I was drunk than when I was sober. So I just kept drinking.
How long were you married to him?
16 years.
16 years.
Yeah.
Did the aggression did it escalate or?
Oh yeah. Cause at first it was all emotional and mental control. And then he started manipulating me with things. I can remember the first time there was a swingers magazine that showed up at his house in the mail. And he almost kind of made fun of it, like, oh, that's so weird. I wonder how that ended up here. And I was so naive or whatever. I was like, yeah, that's kind of weird. And so he's like, well, let's look at it. And he just starts showing me the magazine. And this just continued until finally he's like, saying that we need to go to swingers bars and we need to pick up other couples. And again, at this point, we were about, well, when he really started trying to get me to do that, we were probably about 5 years into the relationship. He had me convinced that nobody else would ever want me. I was such a mess. I was a terrible wife. I couldn't clean a house right. I couldn't, there was just a huge long list. And because I was already believing that before I ever got with him, he just reinforced what I already believed, that I was never going to be really loved, that I was only tolerable, maybe, that I was never going to be good enough. So I did whatever I could to keep him because I was afraid if I lost him, I'd never be loved again. So I did whatever he asked. So it started with that. He started wanting me to go to strip clubs and hang out there, and I did. And then I was a teacher now, by the way. I can't remember how he started, but he even wanted me to get up and do like amateur nights and stuff. Like he really, but that was the only time he was ever proud of me. He was only proud of me when I was like doing his bidding, and no matter what it was, I felt like I had to. And part of me was afraid not to, because again, as that continued and as the mental manipulation didn't work anymore, the physical started. That's when the pushing and that's when the grabbing. And to this day, when I see a bruise, I almost have a hard time even looking at it because it just brings me back to the times I was covered in bruises and contusions. And it got worse and worse and more physically aggressive as the relationship.
So let me ask you this, Renee. I believe that once we ask God into our lives that he's there. Mm-hmm. So did you feel or did you hear the voice of God somewhere in there calling you, saying, I'm here? I mean, what was going on in your head spiritually or in your mind and soul?
So there was a period of time there where I just didn't even talk to him. But if you'd asked me what I believed, I would have still told you, oh, I know God's real and I know Jesus is real. I believe all that, but this is just my life. And this is what I deserve now because this is what I've chosen. So for a while, I was pretty cold to all that. And every once in a while, I would try to drag him to church because things would get so bad. I was like, the reason my parents have a good marriage is because of God. I know that. So if we would just go to church, but we would go to church and then go right back to the lifestyle. So it never made anything better.
So where did this relationship, I mean, it came to a head at some point because,
it did. Halfway into it, we were about 8 years into it. There was a night that the fight just escalated, and I don't remember exactly all that happened. I'd been drinking. I'd been doing cocaine. He had to, and we were both, at this point, I was fighting back. Like, it had gone on long enough, and I was so tired of being beat down that I was starting to fight back, both emotionally and physically, which made it worse. Because once I started fighting back, he got angrier. So the fight had gotten really bad that night, and my nose, I thought my nose was broken. It was bleeding pretty bad. And once he saw the blood, it kind of stopped him from the raging. And I said, just get out of the house, just leave. And for the first time ever, he did. And maybe because he saw the blood and he knew that if I called the cops, he would be arrested. So he left that night. And that's the night I went in. He had a gun in our closet, which I was always angry with him for having because I didn't trust him with a gun. But I went and got the gun. And I'm a girl raised in Arkansas. I know how to load a gun, okay? But I got the bullets and I got that gun and laid down on my kitchen floor, and this was it. And again, it was the same voices, same story. You're a burden. You're an embarrassment to your family. You're never going to get it right. You're never going to be good enough. You've made a complete disaster of your life. Everybody's better off if you're gone. This is the voices I was hearing. So I'm bawling my eyes out trying to load this gun. Couldn't figure out how to load the gun. Again, this was God, because I know how to load a gun, but I couldn't make it work that night. And just having to wait till the next morning, it gave me that moment to stop and think about what I was doing, so I didn't do it. But that was when I finally said, I can't go back. I told him, I'm not going back to this. I'm not putting up with this anymore. So I kind of went on my own that summer. I thought it was over. But of course, I wasn't running to God like I should. I was running to other men. There was a friend of a friend, just the whole mess of, and then there was a guy, and I did it again. And
this was 8 years into your 16-year. Okay, so you were still married. Okay, you were separated.
But I kind of had a little mini affair with one of his friends, and so it was just a summer 1 week thing. But I didn't think we'd ever get back together, so it didn't matter. But when I got back, I started attending a church down there, a mega church down there, that had been recommended by a friend. And as soon as I walked in the first Sunday, I was like, yes, I felt home again. I wanted things to be right. So I started trying to get my life right. But to my shock, when I found out that the church would do free counseling for people that went there, I asked my ex if he would go to counseling with me. And I knew for sure he would say no, but he said yes. So he went to counseling with me at the church. And on the way up to our first counseling session, he said, if this guy tells me Jesus is the answer, I'm out of here. And I thought, this is going to go great. But he did listen to this guy, and he did try to start making some changes, and I assumed that meant he sincerely wants to change his life. And he did go forward and accept Christ. He was baptized, and there were some changes. The emotional abuse was way less, and for months he didn't, no physical abuse or anything, but eventually, he just couldn't, he didn't have his stuff fixed. He accepted Christ, but there was all the damage in the background and everything that he hadn't done anything about. So eventually he started hitting me again. And I remember the first time he hit me again thinking, this is never going to change. I don't know what I'm doing here. And that's where the marriage started to die for me. It was, 9 years in, I already knew it was over, but I didn't know how to end it, basically.
So you said you were married for 16.
Yeah, I stayed for 7 more years. It was different those 7 years. We were very involved in our church. And so we just kind of kept this marriage going, but there was no depth to it. It was just kind of like going through the motions for me anyway. And I was doing it for all the wrong reasons because I thought it's what I had to do. And there were just a million things. And so that was about the time that the kids became an issue because we did not have children. And so right about the time I probably would have left, we started looking into trying to have kids. And so we tried to get pregnant, and that didn't work out. We saw a specialist. I lost 8 babies trying to get pregnant. Biggest heartache biggest heartache of my life, and to have to go through it with him was not easy because he was not exactly supportive. But we tried, and that didn't work out. And then we tried an adoption in Russia, and that ended up falling apart. So that became my obsession. And I was very involved in church and church music, so I would do that. I was having a quiet time every morning. I was very, very serious about my relationship with Christ, but my marriage was not. I was not surrendering that to God. In the end, a friend of a friend had children that she had taken in because they were relatives, but she didn't want to start her life over. She already had kids graduating, all that, and was trying to find a Christian couple who would take in this 2 kids. And so we started fostering them, basically, respite for her, but they were staying with us most of the time, and enough that the little boy started calling me mommy. He thought I was his mom, and I was in love with those 2 kids. I still pray for them every morning, and I will always love them. But that kind of clouded my judgment a bit. And even though the marriage was just really bad, I wanted those kids, so I was sticking it out. So what I ended up doing, and then there was a boy, an ex of mine, I found me on Facebook, and we started talking online, keeping the facade going for our church, for everyone else, but in secret on a computer, I was having a very passionate, emotional affair. And at some point, I finally realized, like, this is not okay. So the account that I had made especially to talk to him, I deactivated and then went to my husband and admitted what had happened. So I went to bed, and in the front room, because I was kicked out of the bedroom for this, he reactivated the account and read everything that had gone on for the last 2 years and drank while he was doing it. So I was just awoken from a deep sleep to a rage. I mean, I've never seen him rage like this before, and I'd seen him rage pretty bad. And I knew the second he woke me up by dragging me out of the bed by my feet. And I knew the second that happened, like, this was not going to be good. And for about 5.5 hours, he chased me around the house and just, I mean,
5.5 hours.
Yeah, it was really, really scary. It was it wasn't the first time I thought he was going to kill me, but this time I was absolutely sure he was going to kill me.
I don't know how you could have avoided him for 5.5 hours.
Right.
I was like, holy cow.
Well, and I didn't really avoid him. I just got beaten by him for 5.5 hours. And and again, there's no reason I should have lived through that night. There's no rational reason. He was a 300-pound large man that everyone I know who knows him is terrified of him because they know how scary he is. And here I am, this little 5'7" girl, and he definitely should have killed me that night. That's when I finally decided it was time to end it. So, which also meant giving up the kids, which honestly was harder.
Yeah. So what happened with the kids?
Well,
I mean, did they stay with, was he abusive to them as well?
No, he was not. But that was part of my catalyst was, I can't guarantee that they'll be safe with him. Maybe now they would be, but what happens when they're teenagers and they talk back? Or I knew the time would probably come, and then that kind of led to, well, if it's not okay for them, why is it okay for me? And so I went to the aunt who we were going to adopt from and said, hey, here's what's really going on, and I'm sorry I lied to you, but I just wanted to be a mom so bad. And I left it up to her how to handle. She ended up adopting the kids.
So you gave them up. You got divorced. Where were you located at that time?
That was in Florida.
Is in Florida. So then what happened?
I didn't want to leave. My whole life was there. But I was at least praying and asking God what I should do. And then I came to Arkansas, and the first job I applied for, I got. So I was like, great, I have to go back to Arkansas. So kind of kicking and screaming, I left my beaches and my seafood and all my friends and everything and picked up my entire life and moved back here. I knew I had done the right thing, but I walked right into another relationship, a guy that I had known since elementary school. I walked right into it. No time for healing, no time for figuring out what was going wrong with me. I just, and then there was a boy. So
let me ask you a question about that because, I hear the term love and relationship addiction.
Yes.
Would you classify that?
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't realize that till I went to Celebrate Recovery and found out there's a thing called love and relationship addiction. And then I read the little white sheet and I was like, oh, that's me. So yes, absolutely. And it was almost like a drug. Like I lost this drug, so now I need another fix from somewhere else. And this person was there and already talking to me online. And so I literally moved into Siloam and bam, went right into this other relationship. And it was just as dysfunctional and toxic as my marriage was.
Isn't it interesting that when we talk about in recovery and sanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Yes.
And you keep getting into, or you did keep getting into the same kind of relationships that you had been getting into your entire
Absolutely.
life.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So where did that, so how long did that relationship last?
About 5 years. And denied the truth about it. I knew he had other girls on the side and everything. And I just kept telling myself it wasn't true, or I wouldn't be that stupid. I don't know. I think I I knew the truth, but I just was loving relationship addicted, and I couldn't give it up, because then where would I be? I'd be all alone, and look how old I am. I'll never get anyone else. And I just put up with things I did not deserve and stayed in a relationship that was not healthy at all, just because I wanted to be accepted and loved.
So how did you get out of that relationship?
I finally just said, hey, this is it. I cannot keep doing this. And I was finally aware of the fact that the love and relationship was the problem, because I'd gotten everything else in my life right. I was with God on everything else, but that one thing. I did not want to give up and do it God's way. And so I finally said, okay, that's it. I will do it your way. I'm like, God, I just give me a life that's free of abuse, and let me find some dreams for myself. I'd given up my own dreams and kind of chased the men instead. So I said, God, I just want it to be you and me. Just keep me from getting into another mess. And that's kind of like, it doesn't have to be good, Lord. I probably don't deserve good, Lord, but just keep me from another mess.
So did he answer your prayer?
Yeah. So yeah, I stayed single for a while. I ended up that next year deciding that I wanted to go on vacation. And by this time I was really starting to listen to God. I was listening to worship music. I was praying. And I had surrendered my love life, which to me, I thought meant no more love life. And I was okay with that. I was absolutely okay with that. So I'd been going through that process when I decided to go back down to Florida for a vacation. And, I can remember the moment where I just kind of it's like God was leading me through this process of like the 12 steps of recovery. I just didn't know what they were, but he was already leading me through them. And I was just evaluating, why would I end up in these relationships? Why did I keep making these choices? And he helped me start to realize that there was some brokenness, there was some hurt, and I wasn't messed up. I wasn't like inherently flawed, which is what I believed. I had just dealt with some hurts, and this is the way that I chose to handle them. And it was a huge relief. It was the first time I didn't just hate myself in 50 years of life, pretty much.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you came back from Florida, that trip.
I did. And actually, while on that trip, I went out with my girlfriend and I were going out to dinner. And I said, hey, have you talked to John? And this was a guy who was a friend of both. We had both dated his friends. And John was just like this guy that I always, he was so kind and generous, and he took care of everybody else. And I always thought the world of him. He was a good friend. I'd probably told him I loved him for 25 years. Hadn't seen him in 10, but we just wanted to see him. Let's just call him up and see if he wants to go to dinner or something. So we called him, and he said yes, he'd love to. And he met us out for dinner, and he and I sat there the whole time just reconnecting. And he started telling me about his life and about how Celebrate Recovery had brought him healing in some of the stuff that he'd been dealing with. And I'd had 2 counselors tell me Celebrate Recovery was going to help me out. And I was like, well, I don't need that. I'm not an addict. So I never went. But when he starts telling me how great it's been for him and, hey, would I like to visit the one he went to down there, I was like, hey, I'm in Florida. Nobody's going to see me walking into this recovery thing and think that there's something wrong with me. Because of course I have everybody fooled that I'm fine. So I went with him. And the second I started hearing them read the stuff there, it just all fell into place that yes, I'm a Christian, and yes, I love Jesus, and I always have, but I need these tools to figure out how to get past all these hurts and everything that happened to me when I was younger and all the things that I chose to do because of it. So that's when I decided I'm going to try this celebration recovery thing to see if that finally helps me get to where I know God wants me to be. So,
And that was in Florida.
that was in Florida.
On your trip.
Yes. And of course, the guy that invited me on to go to CR and was my good friend, we kind of started talking about how our lives were heading in the same direction. I mean, we'd been in this party crowd together. We'd done all this crazy, like he knew all my crazy stuff. Something if I met another guy, I would like not want them to know for a while. He was there. He experienced a lot of it. So we decided to start dating, and we kept a long distance relationship going for a year.
He's in Florida.
He's in Florida. I'm in Arkansas. I come back here and start getting involved in Celebrate Recovery right away. And really like that's where just incredibly huge life changes started to happen for me. So, and I always thought all these guys that I've talked about, like they're all very different, but they weren't. They weren't different. And the way that I approached the relationship was the same. Like I had this pattern of running to men to solve my problems instead of letting my relationship with God be the answer. Even though I knew from the beginning that God was the answer, I let this get in the way. And so when I saw that pattern and when I realized that the hurts that I got as in my childhood, which my parents never meant to give me any hurts, but that's just the nature of sin. When I realized that the choices I made were because of the hurts I had and because of the belief that I wasn't good enough and that I couldn't truly be loved. I thought like, yeah, people will love me, but they'll hate everything about me because I'm such a high maintenance pain in the butt. You know, I really believed that. So seeing that, no, this was hurts. This was my response to hurts. And those can be healed. Like Jesus can take those. That's where the huge like life change happened. Was
Amen.
in that. Yeah.
So whatever happened with this John guy? I mean, that's down there in Florida.
Yeah, no, we dated for a year, long distance, lots and lots of long phone calls, which was actually great because we both had a history of not doing relationships the right way. I always put the cart before the horse, which meant sex came first, and then maybe trying to get to know somebody later came after, and that's not the way to start a relationship. So this time, we both at 50 decided, you know what? Let's actually do it God's way. We're not going to have sex be a part of our relationship. We're going to get to know each other on the other level and just do it the way God intended for it to do in the first place. So that's what we did. And so we spent hours and hours on the phone, really getting to know each other. We knew each other before, but not at that level. And so I think that was, it was a fantastic way to start a marriage. That, and we both had Celebrate Recovery in our repertoire. You know what I mean? Like to start a marriage already having the skills of being honest and making amends and apologizing for things you do wrong and all the things that CR has taught me to do in relationships absolutely work in marriage too. And we had it from the very beginning. So that's been a great way. And yes, we did get married in May of 2018. So, and it's just been, I couldn't believe if you had told me 7 or 8 years ago that God would do this in this short of time, I would never have believed you. I would have thought, look, I made a mess of my life for 50 years. There's no way that it's going to get fixed in that short a period of time. There's just no way. And yet, and I'm not saying it's fixed. There's always more to learn. But when the Bible talks about replacing what the locusts, I beg to differ. I think God goes beyond what the locusts have taken. Like all I really deserved, all I really hoped for was just not to have a mess. And I would have been okay with that. He did way more than replace. That's all. It's like he's taken it way beyond anything I ever would have imagined that he could do. And that's the amazing thing about God.
So if you could whittle your story down to one or two sentences, one message that you could give to someone who may be listening and says, that's my life. I have love and relationship addiction. I keep jumping from one relationship to the next. What advice would you give them?
Seek ye first the kingdom of God. And I heard that verse my whole life and knew that, but like all these things, what do you mean these things will be added to you? Well, that's true for the love life too. And that's the one thing, like I had a lot of other things that I did God's way and I was following God. But when it came to my love life, I kind of kept that off in a compartment. I'm like, well, God says I can't have sex before marriage. Screw that. Like I just didn't want to do it God's way. So that was the one thing that I chose to keep for myself. And it ruined my life. If you don't do it God's way, it's never going to be what it should be. And I'm not saying nobody ever gets married off of a dating site and has a good marriage. I'm not saying that, but I feel like, I spent all my time looking for that. I was pursuing men to fill myself, and it wouldn't ever work, ever. And so, even today I have a healthy marriage, but John is not the reason that I'm confident. John is not the reason that I am who I am today. I love him. Jesus is my Sunday. John's the cherry on top. I say that and I mean that, but that's the whole point. Like if you chase after men, you're only going to get what men can give you. And it's never going to be, if you chase after Jesus, Jesus will bring you the man. I say it is worth doing it the right way. I only did it once, but I'm telling you, our marriage has been blessed. And we just have a very content, peaceful marriage. And I truly believe part of that's because we chose to do it God's way. And so you can chase relationships your whole life. It doesn't fill that void. It doesn't give you what you think it's going to give you. So that next one around the corner isn't going to be any better than the one you were just with. And also I always say, work on getting yourself healthy. That's like, take all that energy and concern and all that you're putting into boys and relationships and put it into yourself and getting your relationship with Jesus right and getting yourself in a healthy place. Figure out why do you need relationships so bad? Do that first. And once you get yourself healthy, those things will come to you. They really do. And so that's what when I work with these young girls all the time, I just remind them, you're worth so much more. So if you can just remember that and stand up for that, he'll bring you way better than you'd ever make on your own.
Thanks, Renee, for sharing your story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and maybe you recognize symptoms of love and relationship addiction in your life, if you have been in an unhealthy cycle in your relationships, maybe it's time for a change. There is healing and restoration as we allow Jesus Christ into our lives and admit that we have a problem. Seek God first and allow Him to lead you into the right people who can give you the help that you need to bring positive change into your life, just like He did for Renee. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time. Hey, if you are still listening and you like this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you and may God bring positive change to your life.